I also recall one night introducing a new face-off play to my Pee-wee team. I just drew a circle outside our dressing room and then called each five-man unit out, one line at a time, to walk through that new play. Years ago, I used to introduce new Hockey North America adult teams to the game. I had them on the ice for 1 hour per session, but I also had them for an hour beforehand in a locker room classroom setting. When it came time to teach them a simple forecheck, here's what I did. I spent plenty of time explaining the thinking behind each player's role, and then I asked 5 players to rotate that forecheck to look something like this. I next brought the 5-man unit to the back of the room and explained how each role had to be filled with urgency. I mean, the first forward into the zone had to fill the first role by pressuring the puck. The second forward had to back up the first guy, and the last forward had to cover the high slot in line with the far post. And then, of course, the 2 defensemen had to quickly get up inside the zone, one guy sticks length off the board and the other guy in line with the far net post. Before leaving this idea of training, you ought to know that I'd developed that years before for a high school team that was having trouble with their transition game. In other words, those kids were slow in switching from offense to defense and back to offense, and they were slow moving from each part of our system. During our 1979-80 season, I noticed that my high school team was really slow reacting to changes in puck possession. I mean, our transition from defense to offense to defense wasn't what it should be, and I knew there had to be a way to help my kids. So I spent some pretty long hours viewing game tapes and scratching notes. First on my list of ideas was a notion that the puck can be a distraction if we want our players to concentrate on something else. Please think about that one. Secondly, I sensed that a scrimmage-type setting caused more confusion and a place for players to sometimes hide or make excuses for their improper actions. Third, I thought it important for me to somehow control the timing of our transition drilling. So in effect, what I arrived at was that I would work with only one 5-man unit at a time, with a goaltender at each end. I'd only introduce a puck when it was appropriate to a given play, and I'd have to signal to my players at the exact moment at which I wanted them to react in a certain way. My first attempt at fixing our transitional play simply called for a unit to go on the attack and then to react appropriately when I suddenly called out back check. In other words, they'd start on the offensive, but then have to, on my signal, immediately leave the puck and switch to their defensive roles. A few days later, I thought to slightly expand on my idea So I again had a 5-man unit attack, react to my call to back check, and then to find a loose puck and switch back to offense as soon as I called out attack. Having a long weekend to think on what I'd seen during those brief experiments, it dawned on me that I could expand on the short snippets of commands and player reactions to simulate something pretty close to a typical shift. Actually, it took me some time to arrive at the commands I'd use, because these had to be easily understood, clear-sounding, and of only a few syllables. From there, I had to familiarize my guys with each command. I used a local school gym to do this, but here you see a group of some youngsters in one of my summer hockey schools walking through the various elements of their transition game. By the way, I can't tell you how beneficial this off-ice setting is for laying the positional groundwork. Now, there's no set sequence of calls for gaining benefits in this form of drilling, except that a coach would want to keep alternating the logical switches that take place in a team's offensive and defensive roles. But as an example, I might start my MP drilling with a face-off, and then put a 5-man unit through the paces of a typical shift. I might yell forecheck right, as if we'd won the draw and dumped the puck towards the right corner. And as the kids moved towards their proper positions, I might next call out forecheck left, requiring them to quickly adjust as if the puck has moved to the other corner. As a tip here, once players become familiar with all the commands, it's important for the coach to keep a game-like tempo going. So I almost always call out the next command before my players are able to complete the previous one. In other words, I'd yell out forecheck left just before they arrived in their forecheck right setup. And I might call for them to back check before they could completely satisfy the forecheck left command. From the call to back check, I could bring my guys all the way back into their own end by yelling defense left, as if the puck has moved to the left side corner. And it's likely I'd next call defense right before they could complete that setup. Now, notice that there hasn't yet been a puck out there to distract my players, and that the only opponents are imaginary ones. So picture how easy it is for a coach to observe every little movement of the players. Actually, I've joked with my guys about this through the years, in that there really isn't any place to hide on that big ice surface. So it becomes pretty obvious if any given player is running around without purpose. Of course, sooner or later, a puck must be introduced. So I eventually ask a third goaltender to keep me constantly supplied. And I just toss a puck out with each offensive command. Here, I'm yelling breakout, as if we've suddenly won the puck during our defensive zone coverage. And so it might go. Forecheck left, back check, breakout, as if our opponents dump the puck in. Again, I can inspect for the little things, like the way my goaltender handles the puck, or how well my skaters move through their routes. Passes should be right on target also, since there aren't any opponents to blame miscues on. This format evolved even more when I moved on to coach at a small college a few years later. As a matter of fact, I received lots of compliments from opposing coaches when it came to my team's counterattacks or regroups. Of course, they wouldn't have known that I'd eventually built that phase of play into the MP drilling. Actually, it was easy. For, as it would usually happen in a game, I'd command my guys to back check. Then I'd toss a puck out to the call of counter. And with that, the defenseman would control the puck as my forwards moved through predetermined pass-receiving patterns. I also discovered that I could tie together shift after shift simply by calling for a line change. And, stickler that I am for clean changes on the fly, I found that I could inspect each dump-in, the way substitutions took place at the bench, as well as how quickly a fresh unit got in on that dumped puck. Then, a final note. The name MP stands for multi-purpose. This because I gradually discovered numerous byproducts to this kind of drilling. For one thing, I noticed that trailers sat back a little more on attack plays because they knew I was going to ultimately call out back check. Also, remember, there's nowhere to hide out there for those 30 or 40 seconds. So players tend to really skate their buns off, and they really get their share of speed, agility, and conditioning work. Now, despite its pretty long history, I'll suggest that the MP drill format hasn't and probably never will stop evolving. I think special teams can be worked into it, and I think new concepts like cycling could be added to the offense, as well as just about any other new tactic that ever comes along. Quite possibly, the viewer can even take this concept further than I've ever imagined.